Okay, so impact. We're going to talk about some of the impact issues. We've talked about some of these, and so one of the things that I really try to tell parents, and somebody asked me, at what age do you talk about this? I talk about it early on. I don't do it the day I deliver the diagnosis. When I deliver a diagnosis of mental retardation and or autism, this is the way I usually do it. You may be in environments that you can't do this, but that's one of the benefits of being in private practice. This is what I do. I give, especially if they're not expecting it. These days you don't find many people not expecting it at all. I give the diagnosis, I give them a chance to be really sad and upset, and I say, okay, do you have a good social support system? Let's have you come in a week. I'm going to check in with you by phone over the next few days and see if you have more questions. I ask them to keep a list of questions that they start generating over the next week, and I have them come in a week later to start talking about intervention and long-term plans. They really have to, parents really have a chance, need to have a chance to get used to this, to grieve and or not grieve or have whatever reaction they're going to have. And trying to talk about intervention in the same session where you deliver that diagnosis, I have found is just a disaster for a variety of reasons. So if you can do it, I highly recommend to do it that way, because it also, they just don't, they're not able to take in more information when they first get the diagnosis, I find. Very few parents are. And they'll call you and ask for questions later on, and they'll have questions because they'll talk to friends and they'll hear information, so it's really better to try to wait if you can. Financial impact of the disability. So one of the things that we talk about is resources and financial resources, and does the family have resources to be able to supplement what the school's offering, or are other adjunctive therapies that are not paid for by insurance options? And again, where I help families prioritize of what do we know works. ABA, loading up on private speech and financial are my two biggest focuses, okay? Most schools aren't providing enough speech intervention, and that's just the bottom line. They're providing an hour or 2 hours if you're lucky.
Sometimes even 30 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, not enough. 3 hours a week is what you typically want to find, and most of the studies on ABA, that's what they were looking at 3 hours a week, okay? Most parents, if you're going to spend money out of their own pocket, what do I recommend? This is where I recommend they spend it. And then find a social intervention group. Supplement speech therapy, get the speech cooking, get the pragmatic aspects of language cooking, and get a good speech and language therapist. If you're going to spend any money, that's where I'd spend it.
Is the speech evals the school districts do, are they pretty thorough, or did you?
Most of your speech evals are pretty good. I haven't seen many speech evals that aren't good. Again, let me just go back and say I have the utmost respect for school personnel. In a time of limited resources where we keep cutting their budgets, and any school psychologists that are left, which are few and far between, I try to do everything to support them, because most of them are good folks trying to do the best they can. And most district personnel these days are doing, I had a school psychologist in a program I ran a couple weeks ago who was doing 8 evals a day. Can you imagine? I mean, I can't even imagine. How can you do that? I mean, how could you possibly do that well? I mean, that's just being put into an impossible situation. And those are for people who actually have that sort of budget. I mean, that's just horrendous, right? College, it's one of the first questions people ask me. Yes, do these kids do okay in college? The higher functioning kids can go to college. You're going to have to pick a program that looks and works with kids on the spectrum. Living arrangements become a huge issue, as you might imagine, and finding coursework and finding somebody on campus. They have to have a really good learning disability program. There are a couple programs back east that have specific programs now that are geared for kids with autism and on the spectrum. In adolescence, if parents can afford it, there are grown-up private schools and residential facilities on the East Coast. I know fewer out here where kids can just go and live and sort of have a different environment. Very academically rich and able to sort of cater to the needs of these kids in terms of the social realm. What happens when mom and dad pass away, especially if there are other kids? I think one of the big areas ripe for research, if you guys are involved in research at all, siblings and kids, the impact on the other siblings in the family, huge. I had a couple kids in my practice write their high school essays about their brother or sister who had autism, because the whole family oftentimes becomes focused on autism. It's not so much different than a lot of other disorders, but the issue here is that these kids have so many meltdowns that the whole family ends up adapting their whole life and stays in more, doesn't go out as more, because these kids can't do the meltdowns, they can't do the social amusement parks. So the life of these kids changes pretty dramatically if you're a sibling. So to talk about that impact and not just assume that the sibling's going to take care of the child when mom and dad pass away. And so having an alternative plan, also designating a guardian. You will have people probably, if you start to do more of this in your practices, come and ask you if you're willing to be a guardian for kids on the spectrum. I turn it down. I've only agreed to do it once in my practice. That if something happened, I would help make decisions. But I think there's an inherent conflict in it for a variety of reasons, and so I would be really careful. What I have agreed to do is that the parents can put my name in, that I would consult with whoever becomes guardian as a resource. Sense of isolation. Oh, there's now, there are some programs, the Jewish Family Service, I think up in LA, and I think a couple other programs have developed programs around this to provide supportive services once a parent passes away, and parents can pay into a trust and sort of then access these services. A couple of the Jewish Family Services on the East Coast have them too. I'm not certain if they have any programs like that here in San Diego yet. I don't know of any. Again, sense of isolation. You know, I would love to look at suicidal thoughts or sense of isolation in these kids long term. I don't know of any studies around that right now. This is a great impact statement written by somebody who had an ASD and was older, and things they wanted people to know. And sort of, I think it's a really good statement. I'll let you guys look at it. You know, I think this sense of selfishness or self-absorbed or egotistical because they don't respond adequately, that's certainly something. The fact they look childish in some or all situations. Others can appear paranoid or psychotic. Temple Grandin, I don't ever know how to pronounce her name correctly, has written some great stuff about this as somebody who's out there in the world trying to sort of combat some of the stigma associated with some of the spectrum disorders. But hearing kids who are older talk about this is really heartbreaking. Again, more what it looks like, trying to dispel the notion that all kids with autism look a certain way, and having people not see them as individuals with strengths and weaknesses as opposed to a group, very important. Again, trying to focus on positive strengths, always important. More ideas for you to look at, and again, these are on the slides. This was written by a child who is higher functioning. This one I particularly love. The next time you think of autistic children, remember that children grow up. The next time you think of someone who you get furious with because they just don't get something simple, even though they can do some things that are complicated, remember us. I think that's the hardest. And especially as a clinician, I'll never forget Wayman Benton, who was my first supervisor ever. Wayman, at one point I had somebody, a patient who wasn't getting something and it was so clear to me what they needed to do. And Wayman said to me, "Bonnie, if he were blind, would you ask him to see?" And trying to remember that when you're working with these kids, especially the older kids, it's just, you know, if I'm trying to teach something and they don't get it, then I need to start over and do it differently. It's not about them. It's about my ability to reach them in a way. And I use that now as a guidepost. Thank goodness I had Dr. Benton as a supervisor when I was first starting out, because he really taught me a lot about working with folks. Very important.